I'm Kathleen Lindsey, and I'm talking about the conflict and consensus perspectives in sociology. These are two perspectives that discuss law and its purpose as a social control mechanism. The consensus perspective is what I would call the optimist point of view. It holds that law is fundamentally good and fair. It's impartial. It's designed to keep the peace. Laws reflect the values of society, and they're adhered to out of respect. You'll find that many of the early political theorists and scholars we talked about generally hold the consensus perspective, and some people would argue that this is because of their higher class standing, whereas you don't see the conflict perspective talked about much until later down the road when education became more widespread, and it holds more of an unenthusiastic view of society. That humans they're greedy, they're self-serving, and laws exist to keep the powerful in charge. Instead of following the law out of respect, people do so by coercion, by external factors. Both of these perspectives kind of fit in depending on where you look in society and from which side you stand on. And I think a good example to use would be if the government imposed a flat tax or a fair tax, where there's no tax brackets and everybody essentially pays the same percentage. So if we're doing a 10% bracket for everyone, people on the consensus side would argue that if you're making $500,000 a year, you're paying, $50,000 in taxes. And that's a lot more. You're contributing a lot more than the guy who's making $20,000 and contributing $2,000. But it's still fair because everybody's contributing the same share of their income. Whereas the conflict perspective would look at that and say, you know what, no, that's really not fair, because $50,000 to somebody who's making more than enough to pay for their basic needs is a drop in the bucket. And on the other hand, the guy who's left with $18,000 a year to pay all his bills and support himself and possibly a family is probably living paycheck to paycheck. And so taking more on top of that is really just not fair at all. And that's, it's a gross oversimplification of what either side of that believes. There's a lot more that goes into it, but I think it illustrates the difference between the two perspectives pretty well.